Let's talk about the ACT math test. This is a prep course, just basic information on what you need to know, how to use practice exams, and so forth to be successful on the ACT math exam. Here's a prep book, the ACT prep book. You can order it through Hastings if they don't already have it on the shelf. Please make sure that it says official ACT prep and that it has actual ACT exams. There are many ACT prep books, but there's only one that's released by the ACT itself, and it's called the Real ACT Prep Guide. So you don't have to have this by any means. I have exams that I'm going to send you to practice on, but if you want content information to kind of help you brush up on maybe some mathematics that you've forgotten about, haven't used since junior high or early in high school, then this certainly will help you do that. So this is just something that you can get if you feel like you need it. For the ACT math test, you have 60 minutes to answer 60 questions, and shockingly, that's the highest time allotment for each question anywhere on the ACT exam. So you have quite a bit of time. On average, you have 1 minute per question. Now, some questions are going to take you, 2 minutes, but other questions might not take you more than about 10 or 15 seconds. So on average, you have 1 minute per question. The drawback is that most people's math skills are not at the level where they can be highly successful on the math test. And so there's a lot of content that you definitely need to review, because this is asked, the questions are asked in such a way that you actually have to have learned the concepts, not just memorized them and regurgitate the information. You actually have to know the mathematics in order to do well on this test. Another big drawback to this test is it covers so much content. It covers material that you first started learning in middle school, pre-algebra and algebra, and all your high school math classes. Those classes covered a lot of ground, and in order to do well on the test, you have to have a really good fundamental grasp on all the topics that are on this test. Here are the instructions for the math test. Let's read them now, so that you don't have to spend any of that valuable time looking at them on test day. This says you should memorize the instructions. I don't believe so. I think you should just read them a few times and make sure you're comfortable with them. After solving each problem, pick the correct answer from the 5 given and fill in the corresponding oval on your answer sheet. Solve as many problems as you can in the time allotted. Do not worry over problems that take too much time. Skip them if necessary and return to them if you have time. Calculator use is permitted on this test. Calculators can be used for any problem on the test, though calculators may be more harm than help for some questions. Note, unless otherwise stated on the test, you should assume that figures accompanying questions are not drawn to scale. That's kind of a big one. Sometimes we assume they are and they're not. Geometric figures exist in a plane. When given in a question, line refers to a straight line, and average refers to the arithmetic mean. All right, so here's the format of the math test. The format is really straightforward. It lumps all the problems into one big list of math questions, and they don't go in order. It's not all pre-calculus, not all pre-algebra, then geometry, then trig. They're all mixed up in there together. The only visible quirk in formatting is that all the questions are printed on the left-hand side of the page to leave the right-hand side empty for your figuring, as they call it. There are 2 other aspects of the math test questions that I want you to keep in mind. This is the one part of the ACT exam where there are 5 answer choices, not 4, so make sure when you're bubbling in that you pay attention to the first and the last there. And also, it also plays with your averages. If you're guessing on the rest of the test, if you're guessing, you have a 25% chance of guessing correctly. Here, you're only going to get a 20% chance of guessing correctly. Do not leave anything blank on this test at all. So again, your averages on guessing, they take a 5% hit, but overall, it's not a really big deal. Guess blindly if you have to. If you have absolutely no idea how to answer the question, guess and move on. There are basic problems, and then there are word problems. Basic problems just have a lot of math symbols in them, and you get to just, start doing the math process on them right away. Word problems have an extra step in that you've got to turn the words into mathematics, and that stops a lot of students. So that's called what we math teachers call modeling. So you need to be able to turn words into mathematics fairly quickly and accurately. So you might want to practice modeling, math modeling, in order to do better on the math ACT. Basic problem on a complex topic is still more difficult than a word problem on an easy topic. So here's what I would do. Do the basic math problems first. This is a test that's not so much about time management as it is about content management. You know what your personal strengths are math-wise, and those are the ones that you need to go through and do first. I always say something to my students: work from your strengths to your weaknesses, and that's very true on this test. Work from your strengths to your weaknesses. You need to take several passes through this exam. You don't need to just start at number 1 and go all the way through until you stop at number 60. You need to take several passes through this exam. The first thing you need to do is do the basic math questions first, the ones that have very little words attached to them, the ones that have a lot of math symbols in them. You just need to work through those first. Those are going to be some of the quickest ones. Now, I'm going to qualify that by saying sometimes this is also where they'll throw in one that's a big time eater. So watch out for time eaters. They're ones that look fairly simple, but when you get into them, you have to work the problem out 5 different times because you have to compare it to all the 5 answers. That is a time eater, and you want to avoid time eaters. If you can tell that this is a question that is going to take a lot of time to work through, it is to your advantage to guess and move on. You don't have to get a perfect 36 on here in order for your composite score to be meaningful and helpful. So avoid time eaters, just guess and move on. Then after you've worked through those basic math problems, go back and do the word problems that you are comfortable with. Do the word problems that are content that you understand and know and have a really good handle on. And save for last the ones that are your weaknesses. You probably need to go through this test probably a good 3 times. Do your strengths that are straightforward math problems first, go back through and do your strengths that are word problems second, and go back through a last time and go through the content that is a weakness for you. For me personally, probability is a weakness. Why? Because I haven't seen probability in years and years and years and years. It's not something that I work with every day. So when I get a probability question, I have to go back and look for those probability concepts and brush up on them before I can answer a probability question. For you, it's probably something completely different. But sometimes it's the easier stuff, the most basic stuff that you've gone cold on that you need to review. All right, so the content. The ACT covers a broad array of topics, simple like pre-algebra to what are considered to be difficult like trigonometry. And I'll just tell you frankly, the trigonometry questions, if you know your trig, your basic 6 trig relationships, the trigonometry questions are some of the easiest ones. It's just knowing those trig relationships. Sometimes the pre-algebra questions are the most complicated ones because they can go deeper with those and they ask you for more relationships in a pre-algebra setting than they do in a trig setting. The trig questions are really straightforward. So pre-algebra questions can run the gamut of difficulty, so don't slight them in your math review. Make sure you review everything. The most important strategy for doing well is to give yourself a good deal of review time. You have to review, 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 especially review what you don't know. This sounds really silly, but I'm going to tell you something. Students like being right, and they like looking at lists and lists and lists of things and saying, oh, I know that, I know that, I know that, I know that. And if you have 101 things that you're supposed to know for this test, and you know 90 of them, then it would make sense that on the test you would get 90%, right? And it doesn't always work that way. You need to spend your valuable review time and study time on the 10% you don't know. And you need to spend time on that 90% thinking about deeper questions, multi-step questions, not just straightforward questions. So review, review, review. That's the secret to success on this. Even if you're dominating your math class, you'll benefit from a full review because a lot of the material, it's been a while since you've seen it. It might have been 7th grade since you saw pre-algebra. So the subjects aren't hard, but they cover minor details that you probably have forgotten. Use your calculator wisely. I'm going to tell you this, out of the 60 questions, there's probably not more than, I don't know, maybe 10% of them where a calculator is going to be helpful. Just because it's permitted doesn't mean you should go calculator crazy and try to use it on every question. They can be helpful on some problems, but on others they might actually cause you a problem and cause you to go deeper into the problem and spend more time on the problem when your calculator is actually not going to help you. So sometimes the ACT will actually give you a hint that you shouldn't pick up your calculator, and that's based on what your answer choices look like. So always give a glance to the answer choices, and if they're fractions instead of decimals, then stay away from your calculator. All right, that's just a hint. Please use the same old calculator that you are comfortable with. Don't go out and buy this big fancy calculator with all these buttons and bells and whistles and take it to the ACT test. Well, yeah, the calculator is real helpful and it could do a lot of things for you, but only if you're comfortable with it. So use your same old calculator. If you just use a basic scientific calculator, that's the one you need to carry to the test. Please make sure that you put new batteries in it before you go to the test, all right? No sense in having an asset there that's not useful for you because your batteries died. Be careful when you're answering math questions because many math questions take steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And what the ACT knows is that a lot of jumpy test takers, especially if you're not comfortable with your mathematics, you know, they'll have what I call partial answers. And you might get an answer of 6 on step 3 where you had to actually, I don't know, divide it by 2 for the final step so that the answer is 3. Well, 6 will be a choice. I call that a distractor. So be careful of distractors where it's a partial answer. It's an answer to a step along the way in your process. So be careful. On word problems, the last sentence of the problem usually tells you what it's looking for, so make sure you've completed all of the steps in the process to answer a word problem. Consider rereading the last sentence before you actually bubble in your answer, and make sure that you did answer the question that was asked. Here is a big secret to the math test. If you've got a good math intuition, if your math reasoning skills are good, you're going to do well on the math test. If not, it's about knowing the processes, and you just have to apply the processes and the steps correctly on all the mathematics. If you go into each question knowing you can probably use reasoning skills and keep your mind open as you think about the question, you'll find the right answer. If you're spending more than a couple of minutes working on a problem, trust me, you're overlooking a much simpler way of answering the question. Each of these questions is written so that a student with just good basic math knowledge that knows this particular content could complete the test question by averaging 1 minute per question. So if you've spent 5 or 10 minutes on one question, you are attacking that question incorrectly. Stop, go back, take a breather, guess and move on. Whatever you've got to do, don't let it eat up time. I'm going to stop this video here. Look for a second video where we'll talk a little bit more about math strategies.